hate to interrupt all the visiting, but it's time to start. I'm going to have to get my stick. Just a few announcements before we begin class. I'm glad everybody... Yeah. How's the sound? Is it echoing a little bit? Tim, can you turn it down just a little bit? How's that? Is that better? Better? More? Down? Up? Let me swallow it. Okay. Better? All right, very good. Just a few announcements. Tomorrow morning, men, bright and early on a cold, chilly winter day, men's breakfast at 6:30. And there will be a crazy card party on Saturday the 13th at 6 o'clock. It will be at the Penrods. And all the adults are invited. And please let... thank you. I could think of Mike, but not... no offense, Mike, but I know how it works. Anyway, let Jan know by the 7th if you can. Bring a 2-liter drink and a sweet or savory snack. And there is a sign-up Genius if you want to notify that way. The Glenview food boxes, the elementary school boxes are designed to address a family for families who have food insecurity. Each box costs about $50 at Walmart. There's a list of items that can be found online or in the back or in the auditorium. The goal is 40 boxes. Bring items to the stage before the 14th, if at all possible, and you can also donate money. Just designate, or if you put a check, write on what it's for, or if you use the app, you can designate it that way. Summer's Kids Lunch with Santa Claus and Glenview Service Project is scheduled for the 14th, and it will be in the Activities Center immediately following services. There will be lunch and photos with Santa. George, you cannot sit in Santa's lap. You're too old. Anyway, let Caroline Prestridge know by the 7th so we can order the right amount of food. And if you are willing to help decorate serving food, or please let her know. Most of you probably know by now that Janet Akins lost her mother, Imogene Robinson, on Tuesday. That was yesterday. The funeral will be held in Missouri on the 13th. And Mary Frances Daniel passed away this morning around 11 o'clock or so. I think Sean put it on the Facebook page. And the funeral arrangements are still pending. And then we need to remember those who are having continuing health problems: Lovell Davis, Gail Jenkins, Joel Gray, the Myatts, and Sue Simmons. And Jay put a notice on the Facebook page. If you if you didn't get a chance to read that, he gave an update on her health. I did put handouts on the front 2 pews. There's on the back little, whatever you call that thing, sitting in the middle back there. And then Ernest was passing some out. If you didn't get one, I'd like for you to have one. And then I did email them out. I'll update the email, my email list, to see if I need to make any changes. And remember that people are listening online, so I'll be repeating. If you make a comment or a question, if I don't think it's loud enough for this microphone down here to pick up, I'm going to repeat it for those who are listening online. There usually ends up to be about 40, 50 listens. I don't know how many people are at each terminal, but it's quite a few folks, and we want them to feel like they got the full benefit of the class, if at all possible. So before we begin Proverbs, let's have a word of prayer. Our Heavenly Father, we come to you thankful for the blessings of this day. And Father, we're so thankful that we have opportunity to come together and study your word, edify one another, encourage one another, and share our thoughts on your word to help us become stronger, more faithful Christians each day, remembering that we are the light in our community. We represent you, and people see Christ, see the church through our actions every day. So help us to be worthy of that and to set the proper example. We ask your blessings as we go into this study tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. All righty, Proverbs and this is about the third time I've taught Proverbs. You failed, didn't you? Try that. Bill, can you hear? Got it? Where's Bill? Where'd he go? Bill, can you hear now? All right.
Remember the pink one.
All righty. As I was saying, this is about the third time I've covered Proverbs. I never feel like I get a good handle on it, and I still don't. And I think the big reason is there's so much there. I feel like if I only discuss a few Proverbs, like if we discuss a few Proverbs on wisdom, there's so many others in the book that I feel like I don't give them all that they need. But anyway, we're going to do the best we can. Plus, because Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve fall on Wednesday nights, there won't be classes those weeks, so we're going to lose out on those two sessions also. So, but we'll get what we can on there. In my personal study, I always put, just for my own benefit, to help me think about each book, I kind of put my own title on it. You may not think this is appropriate, but for Proverbs, I feel like the book is, don't be stupid and mean, be smart and nice. So we're done. Don't be stupid and mean, be kind and nice. Okay. But anyway, every book has a purpose. Every book. God had, through his providential care, has seen to it that these books are preserved. And so, occasionally I've heard people say they don't understand why Proverbs is there, but I believe that Paul, in his letter to Timothy, the second letter, when he says that all Scripture is inspired by God, profitable for teaching, reproof, correction, training in righteousness, kind of covers that. Proverbs is not a book of doctrine. We know that. There's no doctrine really taught there. It's about daily living. It's about how we get along with people. And so the things that he talked about in that book as far as the meanings of those, like reproving someone is a strong disapproval or reproach or rebuke. Correction means it's not enough to tell people they're wrong. You need to tell them how to be right. And sometimes we're real good about telling people, you're wrong, but this is a book about teaching people, here's what you should be doing, as well as what you should not be doing. Then he taught in the commentary, the Truth for Today commentary on 2 Timothy, on these verses, when he says, training in righteousness, it's like training a child. It's repetition, there's patience, and you can't just tell them once because they don't get it. Anybody who's raised a child knows you tell them 45,000 times the same thing, and then you walk in their room and their shoes are still there. And you pull your hair out. Anyway, that's what he's talking about. Why the word wise, as used in Proverbs, on your handout there, it says describes the person who is ethically and religiously wise, or he has trained his mind, is proven to be a wise learner, or he's a wise teacher. That's how Brother Petrillo in the Truth for Today commentary outlines that. There's three different ways Proverbs can be thought of. And he alluded to this in his commentary, and I've also taken these definitions from the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia. 3 different characteristics. And I don't think it's important to remember the names and all that stuff. This is not a college level class or anything like that, but this one method is the synonymous. The same thing is repeated. An example is Proverbs 3:11 and 12. My son, do not reject the discipline of the Lord or loathe his reproof, for the Lord loves who he reproves. The second part of the Proverbs just emphasizes the first part to kind of emphasize so that you get it. Then to the antithetic parallelism, the second member of the line or the verse gives the obverse side. Lots of times it has a phrase, and then it'll say, but, and then another phrase. So I've given you an example, Proverbs 10:1. The Proverbs of Solomon, a wise son makes a father glad, but a foolish son is a grief to his mother. That's another way that the Proverbs are written. And then the third method, or the third describer, is synthetic parallelism, where it's the second member adds something fresh to the new or explains it. The example I've given you is Proverbs 4:7, 8, and 9. The beginning of wisdom is acquire wisdom, and with all of your acquiring, get understanding. Prize her, and she will exalt you. She will honor you, and you if you embrace her. It just keeps on adding on to it. And so you'll see this pattern all through the Proverbs, different ways. I don't think it really changes how each proverb should be understood. It's just the way that the poetry is written. Burton Kaufman, in his commentary, said, and I put this on your handout. I thought it was excellent. Proverbs is the oldest and most authoritative book on ethics in all the world, and I like that because it is about ethical behavior. It is how you treat your neighbor. It is how you treat your family. What you should expect and what you should expect of your own behavior, how we should judge ourselves and examine ourselves. So I like the way that he put that. Adam Clark said, it's impossible for any description of persons to read the book of Proverbs without profit. I think to me, it's a book you can just sit down and casually read, and you're going to get something out of it. There's always something that's going to speak to you because he covers so many different topics and gets things across. Again, in the Truth for Today by Brother Petrillo, you will not find you shall or you shall not instruction in Proverbs. Instead, we see the appeal to logic and to reason and common sense. And I like the way that he put that. I thought it was well said. So, I've already mentioned the plan of study, and it's on your handout, and you see we'll have about 10 lessons. So, we're going to look at the first 4 chapters. Next week, we'll look at 5, 7, 8, and 9. And after that, then they will be divided up into topics. And so we won't follow a verse-by-verse pattern. I'll be pulling things out, some of it arbitrarily, what I thought the Proverbs spoke to, but I'll divide it up into subjects. And you see the subjects on the outline: righteous and wicked, words in the tongue, diligent and a sluggard, all things that you have heard in your different studies. So, chapter 1, and if you got the email and I sent the link out, you can just follow along in the same details that I'm looking at on that blog page. It's got all the scriptures in it and everything, and you can just follow right along with me, or you can follow along on your handout, whatever works for you. I do want to read these first 7 verses because they are the introductory passage to the whole book, and I think it's important to kind of anchor right there. And for the purposes of this class, unless I tell you otherwise, I'll be reading from the New American Standard Version, the 1995 edition. There is a later one, the 2020 edition, but I'm going to be using the 95 edition because that's the one I had. Verse 1, the Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, to know wisdom and instruction, to discern sayings of understanding, to receive instruction in wise behavior, righteousness, justice, equity, to give prudence to the naive, to the youth knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and increase learning. A man of understanding will acquire wise counsel. To understand a proverb and a figure, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. So in your mind, your Arkansas, how would you say it in Arkansas? What does it mean to be wise to you? What does it mean? I mean, we've all, I've given you dictionary definitions and things like that, but how do you define it? What words do you put on it? Knowing, okay? George, did you have your hand up? Understanding, okay. Discernment? Okay. I asked Karen this. She said, not a man. No. Never mind. Anyway, so I feel like when we associate with someone, we spend time with someone, we get an idea about that person if they're wise or foolish. We get that. It's evident. I mean, sometimes we all question the sanity of mankind. I mean, just when we see how people live, the way they act, and the decisions. But as a rule, I really feel like that people know if you're nice. They know if you have sense, common sense. They know if you're foolish. They see the decisions that we make. I think as just a general broad sense, people know how we act, know what kind of sense we have. It doesn't take long. Now there are people who purposely go out to fool us. We know that, and they get away with it for a little while, but eventually it comes up. So when we talk about wisdom, so then he talks about instruction, and I'm spending more time on these 7 verses than I will spend on the other verses, because I just feel like these are kind of kick things off. So when he talks about instruction, it's the element of discipline for the purpose of teaching. So how does discipline teach? When you say someone has discipline in their personal life, or as we are raising children or spending time with someone, maybe in a work setting, someone who works is your staff, you're responsible for, you're the manager. How does discipline teach someone? How do you feel about that? How does discipline teach someone? Ernest? Discipline teaches you to look before you leap. Do you think that is because you've leaped before and didn't look? Didn't look, maybe? Okay. Yes. What else? Anything else? Pardon? Give structure. There's boundaries. There's rules. And so it's important for, as you know, most of us identify with the child. We've raised children. We want them to be a decent human being when they grow up, right? They're going to pick our nursing home for us. They're going to take care of us when we get old. They're going to have to get a job. They're going to have to do all those things, and so we want them to be decent. So they have structure. They know things are right and wrong, and we teach them, and so that's part of this instruction. So he talks about the fear of the Lord, the beginning of knowledge. So how is having fear of the Lord the beginning of knowledge? How does that work? Why is that true? Or is it true? He says it is. Is that true, and why is that true? Okay, how? Okay, that's. I mean, how else is God going to speak to us but through His Word? He's going to get into this. Solomon's going to get into this later, talking about Father's instruction and all these things. And so we get our instruction here. Sometimes I kind of struggle with this because, like many of you here, I was blessed. My parents were both Christians. They set standards. They set rules. They set boundaries. And so I just grew up knowing right and wrong. And a lot of us were in the same condition. We're same. We were very fortunate. We had parents and adults in our family that gave structure. And we saw how families should act. When we had family get-together, we saw how they should act. So that gave us structure and learning and all that. So, but how does the fear of the Lord, how does that become the beginning of knowledge? You know, for most of us, probably we just grew up knowing right and wrong. But how is the fear of knowledge? If someone has not had that structure, how is the fear of God give them knowledge? Yeah. Okay, so David's kind of question back, is it the fear of separation or just fear? Just being scared. There is. Would you say, I'm not just picking on you, David, anybody, would you say that just that raw fear is where it starts, and then as there's maturing and growing, it gets beyond that? Melba? Well, I was saying that because I feel like most of us here grew up with that structure, grew up with limits and boundaries, and so we just grew up not necessarily having a fear, but we had structure in our life and we were taught. For someone who maybe wasn't taught, it might be a little bit different. But let's put it to a human level. Is a toddler scared of their parents? Are they scared of their parents? Yeah. Should be if they misbehave. So, okay. Yeah. Let's keep going. This is good. You know, this is good to get down to this basic, chew it on this a little bit. When, did you have your hand up? Okay. True. Let me repeat for our online audience. There are people who don't fear, don't have any knowledge, or don't even care, maybe. Okay? Debbie? All right. Yes. All right. We are going to have to move along here, but let me ask you this. In that idea of fear, on the road to Damascus, and Paul is blinded, do you think he was scared? Do you think he had fear? I would have. So it got his attention, didn't it? And I just say that because I do believe there's an element You know, how many of us, when we were baptized because we didn't want to go to hell? Yes. Lord because he thought that was the Lord, or because it was someone who was powerful enough to strike him blind on the spot? He had a knowledge of God already, didn't he? So he probably, I think he knew. Anyway, I just throw that out because this is kind of going to be underlying a lot of what we're talking about. And later on, he's going to allude to this, talking about how as we progress, we see the awesomeness of God. We understand and we look at the world and we see why are certain things happening the way that they do. For example, in the Old Testament, I'm sure that people didn't understand lots of things that were going on, and they accepted when God told Abraham, you got to move. I'm sure he thought, well, okay, but seriously, I got a nice place here, got a nice family, and you're telling me to move? And so he was mature enough to accept that and to move and to go. Anyway, so those are the things that Solomon's going to be pushing us toward understanding and gaining more about wisdom and understanding that. So I really appreciate your comments because, you know, sometimes you've got to dig into these things that are just really very fundamental. So as you look at verses 8 through 19, he starts out saying, hear your father's instructions. Don't forsake your mother's teachings. They're graceful to your head and ornaments around your neck. And if sinners entice you, don't consent. So he starts out talking about, and how many times did your mama tell you not to hang around with certain people because you didn't need to hang around them? My mama did. She said, you don't want to be around that family. You're not hanging around with them, or else. There was sometimes a or else in there. John Pickle, why are you laughing? We probably all can at some time. So, I think we all understand why our parents and why Solomon is teaching, don't hang around with these people. And he goes into it. He says, because they're going to get you into stuff. You're going to end up participating in things that you don't need to participate in. So then he goes, starting in verse 23 down through 33, he says, wisdom shouts in the street. And this is, I kind of want to spend a little bit of time here. Wisdom shouts in the street. She lifts her voice in the square. Verse 21, she cries out. She utters sayings. How long will you love being simple-minded? Later on, she, wisdom, is going to say, I called you and you refused. Verse 25, you neglected my counsel. You did not want my reproof. Then in verse 28, you keep on. And in verse 28, she, wisdom, says, then they will call on me, but I will not answer. There's an or else deal there. So, is wisdom readily available? How? Yes, one would hope through incidents, through experience, or what we've seen, that, you know, we would hope that we would have enough sense to see people that are successful and see how they're living, and we would recognize it. Romans 1 talks about just seeing the nature of the world, that people should have understood there is a God. And he said there's no excuse. They should have known. And there's things that we cannot explain. So you got to wonder what's out there. But how does wisdom come to us? How does it come to us so easily? And George kind of alluded to that. Being taught, people, other adults in the family, or hopefully adults that are close to you, parents, you hope. But remember, there are lots of kids that grow up in families that don't have these supports that many of us were fortunate to have. And sometimes he did. We all know Solomon's life mistakes. Yeah. But he is sharing with us his collective wisdom. And remember, that was one of the things that he was blessed with. God said, what do you want, riches or wisdom? He said he wanted wisdom, so he gave him wisdom. So it begs the question, does wisdom automatically mean good decisions? Yes. He knew better, didn't he? All right. So I thought it was interesting, as you go through, he equates, gives wisdom a feminine trait. So I asked artificial intelligence, just playing around, why did he do that? I'm kind of trying to learn that stuff. And according to artificial intelligence, which means the universe as a whole and the world serves to elevate the status of women in the cultural context of the time, acknowledging their vital role in society. So would you buy that? Do what? Alexa? Need I? Yes. As Karen alluded to earlier this week, right? It's just been a curious thing to me. Part of me says, well, he knew boys would be after checking out girls, so give it a feminine voice. I don't know. He just did. Interesting. Because later on he's going to talk about the adulteress, isn't he? So is there a time when it's too late? He quotes that wisdom, she is going to say, I'm done. So is there a time when it's too late? Yes. My passage that is kind of burned into my mind is Jeremiah 7:16, when God tells Jeremiah, don't pray for these people. I don't want to hear it. I'm paraphrasing. He says, don't pray. I'm not listening. I do not want to hear your prayers on behalf of this people. He was done. He was done. They are going into Babylonian captivity, and there's nothing. The latter part of that verse says, God tells Jeremiah, I am not listening. Boys and girls, when you went into the house and started in on your mom and she said, I'm not listening to your mess, it was time to hush, wasn't it? Because she was done. Now I had a boss that I would be talking to, and he always took notes, had a pen with a cap on it, and somewhere along the way when he was done, he did this. And I knew it was time to say, thank you for your time. Call me if you need me. There is, yes. Some of y'all laughing, y'all been there, right? Okay. So going on into chapter 2, he starts out with an if-then conversation. If you look at those first four verses, and you see this in the if statements in verses 1 through 4, if you receive, if you cry, if you seek. Then in verses 5 through 11, he gives you the then statements. If you do all of those, this is what you get. You'll discern the fear of the Lord. And one of the things, and this gets to this maturity, this growing in wisdom and understanding and getting more mature, the way that Petrillo put it in his commentary, the more we learn, the more we understand. I like that. I like the way that he put that. the more we understand the awesomeness of God and develop this healthy fear, not a just bawling, crying fear, but a healthy fear, or an understanding that, to me, it's kind of like when Job started questioning God about chapter 38 or so. He was questioning, and God says, okay, now I'm going to question you. And so God starts in on Job. And then at the end of that conversation, Job says, I shouldn't have said anything. Okay, but God says, no, I got more questions. And he starts in on him again. He said, really, I shouldn't. And Job says, I shouldn't have said anything. When we start questioning God, it's okay to question God, and it's okay to say, but then we have to listen to what he has to say. Yeah, it's okay to say what's going on. It's okay to say, why is this happening to me? I don't deserve it. It's okay to question those things. Who else are we going to say it to? It's okay. But there's a point that we have to then accept, and we got to work through that. And that's part of that working through progress. And as he talks about here, as we get more mature and we grow and we understand that we understand what this fear of the Lord is more, and it ceases to be that just terrifying thing, but just an awesome respect for someone that we know is so much more powerful than we are. And so as he goes on in this chapter, when you get all this, in verse 7 he says you get a shield. In verse 11 he said this discretion will guard you. In verse 16 and most emphatically, will deliver you from the adulteress, because you've got this wisdom that you've gained because you listened, because you understood. And so as we grow and mature, okay? I know I'm moving along kind of quickly here, but it's a long book, 30 chapters. So anyway, in chapter 3, a key verse there is verse 7. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your body and refreshment to your bones. Verse 11, do not reject the discipline of the Lord or loathe his reproof, for the Lord loves who he reproves, even as a father corrects his son. Verse 13, blessed is the man who finds wisdom. Verse 12 is quoted by Paul in Hebrews 12:6. Forgive me for saying Paul. That's just who I think anyway. So he continues on, and he talks about just some general principles in verse 27. Don't withhold good from those who it is due when it is your power. Verse 29, do not devise harm. In verse 31, do not envy a man of violence. And then in verse 35, the end of the chapter, the wise will inherit honor, but the fools display dishonor. Petrillo calls this the third lesson that Solomon is teaching his son. The first lesson was to hear what the father had to say in the first chapter. The second lesson was to receive and treasure the father's words. Now he's telling his son, don't forget. So in verse 2, he says, if you do all this, he says he'll get length of days and years of life and peace. And he says in his commentary, he talks about that this length of days is referring to the quality of the kind of life that we'll have. That if we have this wisdom, we'll have a better quality life. And we've all seen people who make bad decisions and the chaos that it brings to their life. For whatever choices they make. He's going to talk about handling money correctly. And we've all seen people who do not handle their finances well and the kind of messes that they can get into. And maybe we've been victimized by that ourselves, and we've seen people who make foolish life choices or who are not faithful to their husband or their wife, and the chaos and that brings into their life, or just the poor decisions that people make. And he's talking about, that's one of the things he's talking about. Then the years that he says in verse 2 is talking about exceptional length of one's life. That we know that people who make poor decisions often make life-shortening decisions. And let's just talk about basic, fundamental stuff here. Just on personal note, I had a visit with my doctor, and he says, "You're doing good." And I said, "Well, how hard is it to take a blood pressure pill every day?" He said, 30 to 35% of his patients do not take their blood pressure medicine. So what happens when you have high blood pressure for an extended period of time? You have a stroke. You have heart problems. And to me, that is the dumbest thing that we can do, is you have high blood pressure, your doctor gives you a pill. A pill! All you got to do in the morning, get up, get a glass of water, and take the pill. How hard is that? And I was astounded that he said 35% of the patients don't take their meds. Those kind of things, those are foolish decisions that lead to a shorter life, don't they? You might get lucky. You might get lucky and avoid it. But we see this, the big decisions are the alcoholic or the drug addict. We see what happens to them and how their life is shortened. But there's just fundamental things that we do every day. Just dumb things that people do that cause us to end our life. Anyway, then he talks about it brings peace. And we've all seen this. And he said peace is translated from the word shalom. And we've probably heard, all of us have heard shalom. And he said, he gave the longer definition. It's peace, prosperity, wellness, health, completeness, and safety. And I think about those wisdom things lead to all of these things in our life. And I like that. Then chapter 4. I know I'm ramming these through. I'm sorry. He continues on in chapter 4. The instructions of a father, give attention, you may gain understanding. In verse 3, when I was a son to my father. Then he talks about all the things, these are the same things that his father taught him. And how it was important. So it's kind of like, in your opinion, does that add, if someone teaches you something that is a tried and true tenet of life, does it make it more so if that tenet on life has stood the test of time? Does that mean does that sink in more to a person? If you go, my grandfather lived like this, my father lived like this, and you see the life that if you were lucky enough to be exposed to your grandparents and exposed to your parents, and you see the life that they lived, does that give that more weight and more, I don't know, another word to put on it, that it means more, that it's going to be more correct if it stands the test of time? Does that, you buy that? I mean, okay. Okay. Yes. Yes. Well, and I was leaning towards the spiritual part of that. Yeah, I mean, hey, I remember getting the first air conditioner. I liked it. Yeah. Debbie. Mm-hmm. one of those life lessons. Yes, exactly. That's the second. Was that the second bell? Okay. Well, we hammered through it. Next week will be 5 through 9, and then after that we'll get into more of the just Proverbs by topic. I do appreciate everyone's comments and sharing your thoughts and all. Thank you.